Welcome back to the next session in the Airports Association room. We're excited to have the North Dakota Aeronautics Commission here to provide an update for us. Take away, Aeronautics crew.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kyle Warner, and I'm the director for the North Dakota Aeronautics Commission. And first of all, I want to thank you for joining us for our agency's update session. I also want to thank all of the volunteers who worked hard to make sure that the first Virtual Fly North Dakota Conference is a success. And I, like many of you, also can't wait until these events are also able to be conducted in person again. I also want to say that I think that this year's conference tagline is right on the mark with "Aviation Never Quits." And though many of us have experienced significant challenges in our industry this past year due to COVID-19, I'm proud to say that North Dakota has risen to the challenge, which I believe is due to the fact that we're privileged to have an exceptional workforce, as well as some exceptional leaders in the industry that are doing their very best to ensure that the aviation industry continues forward with perseverance. I also want all of you to know that the North Dakota Aeronautics Commission staff is here for you. We're working hard every day to improve and develop aviation throughout the state. We're always available to you as a resource as you work through any infrastructure or aeronautic-related challenges. Right now, we are working to ensure positive results for aviation are achieved at the state legislature. And though I'm not scheduled to give a state of the aviation industry update at this year's conference, if you're interested in learning more, you can feel free to go online to the state legislative branch website at any time and watch the pre-recorded presentation for Senate Bill 2006 that I provided to our state legislators. Our office also recently opened a grant round for airport infrastructure projects, of which the grant applications are due by April 14th. And we plan on holding a virtual state grant meeting similar to what we did last year on Thursday, June 10th. This summer, we're also planning a statewide update to our pavement condition index information to help provide our airports with that information that you need to ensure that you have the most cost beneficial management of our pavement services. Those are just a few things that we're working on, and I'll have Nels, Adam, and Mike provide additional agency updates. But overall, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has worked every day to improve our state's access to aviation. And I appreciate your ongoing help to ensure that in North Dakota, aviation never quits. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Aeronautics Commission team.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. As you can see here, these are the presenters today. Kyle just spoke, and I'll be presenting here very shortly, followed by Adam and Mike. And our contact information is there as well. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at any time. And on this next slide here, you can see myself. I'm an airport planner here. I cover the Western North Dakota airports. Adam Dillon covers the Eastern North Dakota airports in the red there. You can see the division line is east of Bismarck a little ways. We each cover approximately 50% of our state's airports. Okay, getting right into things. Based aircraft. We use these numbers found on the Airport Master Record, also known as the 5010, shown in the upper right-hand corner in the red box for forecasting growth and classifying your airport. And these counts are included in the biennial NIPIAS report to Congress every 2 years. And that next update will be taking place. The report will be for 2023 through 2027, but those numbers need to be updated by December of this year in 2021. And it is the airport manager's responsibility to update these. And we work with you as the airport managers to update these numbers. And we ask that you do it at annually at a minimum. And also please do so before the December deadline, so your based aircraft numbers can accurately reflect what aircraft are at your airport for the next NIPIAS report. Next slide. Another thing here I'd like to mention is that Janelle, our new licensing specialist, will be working very diligently to accurately reflect based aircraft counts to our state registry. So that is something she's been working very hard on in her last few months here. And if you have any questions on based aircraft, you can reach out to her or Adam and I, and we can certainly help you with that. Or if you have any questions on basedaircraft.com, you can see the contact information below for the company Civics, formerly GCR, and they will assist you with getting any aircraft updated on basedaircraft.com. For example, if another airport is claiming the same aircraft that you're claiming at your airport and you know it is at your airport, you can reach out to Civics and they will help you get that straightened out, as well as any other questions or concerns you might have. A couple other things worth mentioning: if, like I said, if another airport is claiming your aircraft as well as you will not get, neither of you will get credit for it. And if the aircraft is not registered or airworthy, you will not get credit for it. Next. Okay, every year, typically in August, we host CIP meetings, and typically in a normal year, we have these meetings in 4 different areas of the state: Minot, Bismarck, Devils Lake, and Jamestown. However, due to COVID-19 this past year, we were only able to host them virtually. The airports listed here are airports on the left-hand side of the screen that we hosted virtually, and then on the right side, they were also virtual, but we meet with them regularly every month, as they either have very large projects going on, or multiple different projects, or projects that are just very complicated and require a lot of planning and coordination. And then we also formulate a capital improvement plan for the state at the end of the year for all of the NIPIAS airports, and we input all of the individual airports' capital improvement plans into this program and this document to help us as a state see where the pieces fit the best and program and allocate funding as needed. Next. Okay, and with those projects, everybody wants grant funding. And so as a state, federal projects, we typically participate in 5%, although that can change depending on the project. And for state and local only projects, we will typically assist when we can at a 50% rate. However, if you need additional funding or you have a very high priority project, you may apply at a higher rate. And we will take a look at that, and our commission will consider that. Some deadlines to look forward to: Wednesday, April 14th, 2021 is our state application deadline. And then the annual grant meeting takes place on Thursday, June 10th. The commission will make their grant recommendations and awards prior to that commission meeting, typically 1 week ahead of time. And if you believe that you should have received more funding, or you will not be able to complete a project unless you get a rate that's higher than 50%, you're more than welcome to attend that state grant meeting, and you can make your case to our commission, and they will decide whether or not your project needs extra grant funding. And another thing on this slide that I would like to point out here, on the airports tab on our website, that shows all of the different airport tools that we have, and on that is the airport grant funding. You can find all of our forms or requests for reimbursement, any forms that have to do with grant funding. You can find those on that tab. If you click on that, and also our rules and policies and priority schedule will also be on that as well. Next slide. And here, as I was just talking about, you can see the different documents associated with our airport grant funding. Next slide. And to help us plan projects here, I'm sure the FAA will be discussing this more, and they have sent out an email, and it's also on the Federal Register notice, but their deadlines here are below. The notice of intent to apply is on March 15th, and the applications are actually due on May 3rd. And if no notice has been made that you're going to apply for grant funding for your entitlement funds, the FAA will carry over your funds after May 3rd. Next slide. Okay, something that Kyle mentioned that we were working on this year is our 2021 statewide PCI study. The state does this every 3 years to better manage the pavement at our state's airports. We receive grant funding to perform these studies at our NIPIAS airports, and we also use state funding for our non-NIPIAS airports. We select a consultant through the FAA's procurement process to help perform these inspections, analyze the data, as well as update the PCI information based on the distresses of the pavement, and create an interactive database on our website to use this information to better able to plan and schedule these projects and when to perform them. Next year, about this time, we hope to unveil this information, and you'll be able to find it on our website. As you see here, this was our 2018 PCI study. Next year, it'll show 2021, and you'll be able to take a look at that information as needed. Next slide. Okay, getting into some projects from last year that were under construction. Here is Bismarck's wetland removal phase 5. They've really been working hard at mitigating their wetlands on or surrounding the airport, and they're on phase 5 of that currently. It's being constructed as of last fall, and right now the airport will begin further construction on this project this year. They have just been performing the installation of the lift station, as you can see here, throughout the fall and winter. Next slide. Okay, another very large project that has been going on in western North Dakota is the temporary runway 1533 and future parallel taxiway A. That was opened up this past fall after the second phase was complete, and the permanent runway 1432 was shut down, and the first phase of construction of that will take place this summer, and the second phase will be completed in 2022, and then that will be opened up, and then runway 1533 will be turned over to a parallel taxiway. Next slide. Okay, some GA projects here. Garrison, they completed a reconstruction of their south hangar taxi lane, as well as constructing a new development area on the north side of the airport due to constraints on the south end, and there was no more hangar spots available, so they expanded to the north. Next slide. And Hettinger, they completed a rehabilitation and construction of a full parallel taxiway. They had partial parallel prior to this, and then they rehabilitated those portions as well as completed a full parallel taxiway. Next slide. In Mandan, they reconstruct areas.
Nels, we lost it.
Okay. Mandan reconstructed several hangar taxiways and taxi lanes this past year. Next slide. In Minot, they had a couple different projects going on this past summer. They completed GA apron reconstruction. That was a multi-phase project over the year. Losing control here. In Minot, their second project was their cargo apron expansion and reconstruction phase 1. This upcoming summer in 2021, they will be completing phase 2 of this project beyond the orange fence that you can see here in the picture. Next slide. And in Stanley, they started construction of a jet fuel system, and that will be completed this spring and summer. Next slide. And in Tioga, they reconstructed hangar taxi lanes, rehabilitated the East GA apron, and also expanded into a new area on the airport. Next slide. In Watford City, they began the first of 2 phases to complete a runway and parallel taxiway reconstruction, reorientation, and lengthening of the runway. As you can see in this photo, the existing runway remained open in 2020 while construction occurred on either end of the runway with the new concrete that you can see there. And the airport plans to complete this construction in 2021, and we'll close the airport for several months while they do this. And in Williston, after years of planning, design, and construction, they opened the new airport in 2019. However, the airport only had one runway, the primary runway. So in 2020, they constructed their crosswind runway 422. Okay, that concludes my portion of the presentation. I will now hand it over to Adam Dillon.
All right, thanks, Nels. On the east side of the state, we had a number of projects as well. At Hillsboro, they did the dirt work on a parallel taxiway and a hangar taxi lane extension, or a hangar taxi lane construction. The parallel taxiway did encounter some weather delays, so it wasn't able to be paved this fall, but it will be paved next spring. That will wind up being a great boon for that airport. It does have a very active flight training due to UND, and so having a full parallel taxiway will greatly help traffic flow. In Fargo, Fargo has a successful and growing cargo operation by multiple carriers, FedEx, UPS, and Bemidji Air. They're in the midst of a $15 million program to expand that cargo apron, which will greatly enhance their cargo capacity. A few other projects are they're expanding their existing maintenance shop, and then they're also building a new storage building for snow removal equipment. In Kindred has worked with the city to install an extension of the water mains to the airport and install a fire hydrant to airport property. So that's a nice safety benefit. Additionally, this year they have done a variety of pavement repairs as well as performing a taxiway seal coat. In Jamestown, 2020 saw the phase 1 of a terminal apron reconstruction project. The original pavements date back to, I believe, 1968, and we're nearing the end of their useful life, so it was about time. The second phase will proceed several years from now with a rehabilitation of some taxiways in the meantime. Ellendale's in the process of constructing a turf taxi lane. A great deal of the work was done this year. There's some remaining work to be done in the spring. This taxi lane will allow expansion at the airport, some additional growth. It will also offer a benefit to the existing hangars. They have a hangar structure that has doors on both the front and the back sides, but the rear doors are not accessible. So this turf taxi lane will allow those rear doors to be accessible, which will make things easier for the tenants. And additionally, in the future, this taxi lane is planned to be paved. There are some other construction projects that occurred around the state that aren't pictured here for the sake of time. Valley City did do an apron and taxiway seal coat. Can-Do did a very comprehensive rehabilitation of their pavements, doing a mill and overlay to their runway, taxiway, and apron. Walhalla did a seal coat and remarking of their airfield. Milner extended their runway eastward, which will greatly help that airport. That's very active with fly-ins and has egg operations. Lakota installed a self-serve 100 low-lead fuel system. Beach built a wind cone and a segmented circle. Crosby did a seal coat and remarking of their apron and taxiway. Glen Ullin and Linton both did rehabilitation of the airfield lighting systems. Mohall widened and extended their runway, And Rugby did electrical system rehabilitation and rehabilitated some pavement. And Washburn also installed a 100 low lead fuel system. Again, these are only some of the projects that have occurred around the state. There were more on top of this. Some projects we're looking forward to in 2021 include a comprehensive airfield lighting system replacement at Ashley. Grand Forks is hoping to begin intersection construction of their runways as an opening phase of an extensive runway reconstruction project that will occur over the next few years. Gwinner will be replacing a set of their reels at the end of the runway and repainting. Hillsboro will be finishing the paving of that parallel taxiway. Oaks has plans to do an overlay on one of their taxiways and then seal coat the rest of their airfield. Valley City is replacing their fuel system. Jamestown will move forward with a rehabilitation of taxiways A, B, and D. Wahpeton has a large apron reconstruction project planned for their rehabilitation project for the general aviation apron. Bismarck will do phase 6 of their wetland removal. Dickinson will do phase 1 of the reconstruction of runway 1432. Hazen is going to do a pavement and lighting rehabilitation. Minot will do phase 2 of the reconstruction and expansion of their cargo apron. And then Watford City will continue with their runway realignment, moving into phase 2. And then there are additional projects on top of this. Now, you'll see Nels and myself this year make our way around the state, and we'll be visiting some airports doing 50-10 airport inspections. These are FAA-required safety and standards inspections. North Dakota Aeronautics is contracted by the FAA to conduct these inspections on all non-commercial public airports in the state. We do that on a 3-year cycle. The current cycle began in October 2019. There are 89 airports total in the state, 81 non-commercial public airports. Commercial airports are inspected by federal inspectors. The other 81 non-commercials are inspected by Nels and myself. In 2020, we inspected 27 GA airports, and topics that we typically look at are the condition of airfield pavements or turf, lighting systems, fuel systems. We look for both condition and safety features. Obstructions are very important to us, and so we look for obstructions on the approaches into the airport. And then we also discuss based aircraft and annual operations, which Nels already discussed earlier in the presentation. A crucial item for safety at any airport is clear approaches. We seek that all airports in the state have at least a 20-to-1 obstacle clearance slope for their approach surfaces, which means for every 20 feet you move horizontally out from a runway surface, you would have 1 foot of vertical clearance over an object. And that includes terrain like hills, structures, which would be buildings, radio towers, water towers, any trees or vegetation, and then roads. And it's important to remember that roads also include the traffic on the roads, not just the roadway surface. Larger non-precision instrument runways have a 34-to-1 clearance slope that they need to attain. Of the 27 GA airports that we inspected in 2020, 15 of them, that's 55%, had at least one obstructed runway approach. So that's something we want to gradually work toward clearing up. We want all our airports to be cleared to at least 20-to-1. Now, as an airport, some things that you want to keep an eye out for are if there's new construction near your airport. Has a new building been put up recently? Has anybody communicated the construction of that building to you? If there is some kind of construction, whether it's road construction, building construction, or any storage stockpiles placed in a location where they punch into that approach surface. Has anybody parked a vehicle where it could potentially impact that approach? And then a common issue that we see is growing vegetation. That includes taller crops like corn, but more often we see issues with trees. Now, trees are a challenge because they grow very slowly over time and you don't realize how big they get. A little sapling 1 year, 5 years later is now big enough to penetrate the approach surface. So it's very important to keep tabs on all the vegetation, all the trees around your airfield, and then trim them back as necessary. As you can see in this photo, this is an old photo of Park River with some of the trees that grew there, eventually becoming some issues. Park River's done a great job in the last year or two removing those obstacles, and they now have clear approaches, with the exception of the very far north end, which they're working on. Now, I'd like to discuss wildlife hazards and strikes. As kind of a disclaimer here, I will be discussing some crashes and some protocols for wildlife strikes. Just for fair warning, there are some scenes of crashes. All of them are non-fatal and have minimal injuries. But in the event that those scenes make folks uncomfortable, I just wanted to let you give you a heads up. Additionally, there will be some pictures of animal remains. These are necessary for illustrated purposes. So in the last decade or so, we've seen some very high-profile incidents of flocks of large birds causing aircraft crashes, most notably the Miracle on the Hudson in New York. But even small birds can have a danger to aircraft. A small bird can hit an aircraft, a G aircraft at cruise speed with the same force as a Major League Baseball fastball, and they can inflict some significant damage for their size. Large animals like deer, elk, moose can deliver the same kinetic energy as a car crash, so they can inflict severe damage on aircraft. Now, in most cases, wildlife strikes are very minor. They have little to no effect on the aircraft or the occupants of it. Some strikes, the aircraft never even knows about. A very small bird hits, it causes no damage, no marks. The pilot never even knows anything happened, but it does still occur. On the opposite side of the spectrum, strikes can cause very serious damage. They can destroy engines, they can shatter windshields, sever hydraulic and control lines, do damage to tires and brakes, deform aircraft skin. They can cause crashes, and those are all very concerning. Even a collision with a small ground mammal, like a gopher, can cause enough of a directional control issue as an aircraft is moving on the ground to cause an accident. So what exactly is a wildlife hazard? Really, it's anything. Any and all wildlife in the vicinity of anywhere where an aircraft operates is a hazard. Even animals that are small in size, there's only a few of them, they're out of the way, they can still move into a position where they can cause a threat to aircraft. The size and numbers of animals only determines the degree of the danger they pose. Here are some statistics. In 2019, there were 17,228 recorded collisions between animals and aircraft, with over 250,000 since 1990. Now, I say recorded there because most strikes still are not reported, whether someone chooses not to report them or whether they're not noticed, but the actual numbers are higher than what we see here. Wildlife strikes are responsible for as much as $500 million in damage to aircraft in the U.S. alone every year, with total economic impacts that can reach over $700 million. And in the U.S. since 1988, when these records started to be maintained with some diligence, 36 people have been killed and more than 327 injured due to wildlife strikes, and more than 270 aircraft have been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. So this is a very significant issue. Statistically, strikes are most likely to occur on or near the airport. Only 3% of strikes occur en route during the cruise phase. 36% of strikes occur when an aircraft is taking off or climbing, and then 61% occur on approach or landing. And we've got a few cases here. Lower left, a CRJ at Dulles hit a couple of turkeys while taking off, shattered the windshield, had an engine ingestion. In the middle, this is a Boeing 737 that struck a flock of geese on approach. Damage included damage to its nose gear, its steering hydraulics, and fractures to its edge slats. That was a concerning incident. And then in the lower right, a Learjet 36 hit multiple elk while they were doing their takeoff roll. Again, no one was hurt in any of these, but the Learjet caught fire and it was completely destroyed. So what exactly is a wildlife strike? The definition for these can be found in the advisory circular for reporting aircraft wildlife strikes. What it is, first of all, anytime a pilot or someone on the ground witnesses the collision. Second, when a pilot doing a post-flight walk-around or when a mechanic is servicing the aircraft and finds evidence of a strike, whether that's a dent or other damage, or whether it's just feathers or fluids on the aircraft surface. The third point pertains to our airports. Wildlife remains are found by the airport within 250 feet of the runway center line or on a taxiway or apron in the event of a prop strike. Now, the exception to this is if it's obvious that there was an alternate source of death. If you find a duck on the runway that's expired and it's full of shotgun pellets, it's probably not an aircraft strike. And then the final point is important. It's the presence of wildlife has had a significant effect on aircraft flight. That's aborted takeoffs, landings, swerving to avoid collisions. So if you have an aircraft that's approaching the runway to land, a coyote runs across the runway and the aircraft has to do a go around. No one was in any danger. The aircraft is fine. The occupants are fine. The coyote ran away unhurt, but that aircraft's flight was affected, and that is technically a strike. Now, strikes should be reported. It's important for safety and for record keeping, but it's not uncommon for airports to feel a certain stigma about reporting strikes. For many years, airports felt that reporting a strike would be admitting to a kind of a personal failure to mitigate wildlife hazards, or would perhaps get them on some kind of watch list or something. And that's really not the case. It's important to remember that every airport, all airports across the country, will have a wildlife strike at least at one point. Some airports located in migration corridors have hundreds of strikes a year. Reporting a strike does not reflect poorly on your airport, but it's actually the opposite. It shows that you have a commitment to the effort to document and mitigate wildlife hazards at airports. Anybody can report a strike, whether it's that pilot that experienced the strike, whether it's the mechanic that repairs the damage of that strike, whether it's the airport doing a field check and finding remains, or even just a witness nearby. I could drive down the road and I could see a strike and I could fill out the paperwork for it. Now, reporting a strike can fill in vital pieces of information, as well as giving biologists information about changes to species migration patterns or behaviors. Now, an important thing is that anyone that reports a strike, you can have multiple reports filed for a single strike. Every person that reports it might have a different piece of information. That pilot might be able to provide when the strike happened and is the aircraft information. The mechanic can provide the damage to the aircraft, and the airport can identify the species. And so together, all their reports are merged to create a very comprehensive picture of what happened. So how do you file a wildlife strike report? Again, all strikes should be reported, whether it's a bird, whether it's a mammal, a reptile. You do that using a form 5200-7. You see an example of it here at left. It has aircraft information, flight information, date, time, weather conditions, the animals that were seen, if they were hit, if they were avoided, any information about damage to the aircraft or downtime. And so you fill that out. The easiest way to do it is to go to wildlife.faa.gov. You can do it electronically in just a couple of minutes, submit it instantly. It's very quick and easy. You can also use hard copies going into the advisory circular for reporting wildlife aircraft strikes, or going into the Aeronautical Information Manual, Appendix 1.1. Both of them have that form. You can copy them out of that, fill them out by hand, and submit them. Fill out any data fields that you can here. It's okay if you don't have all the information. A lot of strikes, you only have partial information about it. So any information is better than none. When you fill out these reports, try to be as accurate as you can when you're identifying the species that are involved. Identification errors can be very easy when you have similar species. Here are a couple of swallows that look very similar. They have similar ranges, similar size, similar colors. But if you incorrectly identify a species, it can skew data in the database. You could be reporting a species as having been struck that isn't even in your state, might not even be in your country. So it's very important to be as accurate as you can. Another issue that can arise is in the lower right here, we have a couple of falcons, an American kestrel and a peregrine falcon. I know of a case where an airport found a struck kestrel. They filled out their paperwork, but they misreported it as a peregrine falcon. When that went up the chain, peregrine falcons are an endangered species, so that set off alarm bells. Eventually it was sorted out, but it could have all been avoided just by proper identification. Now, some information, some sources that you can use for that to help with wildlife identification. There's an excellent smartphone app called Merlin Bird ID. The Audubon Society produces a series of excellent and very detailed field manuals. Peterson Field Guide produces pocket-sized guides that are helpful. Cornell University Ornithology Lab is an industry leader on animal species, of bird species, and they have an excellent website of allaboutbirds.org. And then you can also pose questions to your local university extension offices. They often have information. Now, what happens if there's not really a lot left to identify? Strikes are usually very fast, they're very violent, and they don't leave much in the way of remains. So oftentimes there's only blood and a few feathers. If a bird seems to have been involved, but you don't know the species, you can actually send in samples of feathers and blood to the Smithsonian Institution's Feather ID Lab. This is a free service. All you have to do is just pay the the mailing fees to ship it over. The Feather Lab has a variety of excellent resources to identify species. They have an entire library of taxidermied birds that they can compare feather samples to. They can do microscopic analyses of the structures of feathers, which are as unique to bird species as fingerprints are to people. And then they also have an array of DNA techniques. Now, please note that this lab, the Feather ID Lab, doesn't accept non-bird species, but if you have a blood sample that you think is a bird and you submit it, they can test it and discover it was instead, say, a bat. If you want to collect samples to send to the Feather ID Lab, the feathers to collect are small downy feathers, which have very unique structures to them, and then large feathers that have unique patterns or colors. Those help a lot. Don't send any other parts of the bird. Don't send tissues or organs or anything else, because those will just rot in shipping and they become a biohazard. Another option is what's called snarge. That's a graphic term for blood and fluids. You can collect a sample of this using an alcohol swab or an alcohol wipe or a sterile swab. If you do this, make sure not to use any paper products, because that carries the DNA of the trees that was used to produce that. Make sure you wear gloves so your own DNA doesn't contaminate the sample. And don't use any kind of solvents or chemicals, because it will destroy the DNA sample. You put your samples in a Ziploc bag, seal it up. Please include a copy of your strike report. You can print a copy off of the wildlife.faa.gov site, or you can make a photocopy of the paper copy you may have sent in via mail. And then put the special case code that's generated if you submit it electronically on the bag in case the bag becomes separated. Then just send it off to the Feather ID Lab. They have a very detailed shipping address here, so I won't read that off. But if you want to send in a sample to them, go to faa.gov, the FAA's regular website. In their search bar, just search for Smithsonian. First thing that comes up is the ID Lab with all their contact info. Now, wildlife are attracted to areas due to cover, shelter, food sources, places to rest. Some very common examples are wetlands like ponds and ditches. Those are sources of water, sources of food. Trees and bushes are good roosts. Wildlife attractant crops, certain crops, especially sunflowers and corn, can draw species in. Residential areas and landfills can be good food sources for animals. Empty buildings, abandoned vehicles, awnings, or other related objects on the airport property can serve as roosts as well. Fencing, while that can keep out ground animals, it does have a tendency to collect certain species like mourning doves, and other doves like to sit on fences. Any foreign object debris, especially garbage, should be removed from the airfield. And then certain weather conditions, for example, certain species like gulls and killdeer are attracted to runways after a rain. There's a few different types of controls you can do to try to mitigate wildlife hazards. There's two categories, passive and active. Passive controls are attempts to make your airport unattractive to animals. If they don't want to be there, then they won't be there. One of the best ways is to maintain your grass at a fairly even height. It's recommended to be 6 to 14 inches. 14 inches is the high end. It's recommended by the DoD. This is a height that is too shallow for large animals to bed down in it, and it's too short. It's too short for animals to bed down in it, and too deep for most animals to forage in it. Remove any FOD on your airfield pretty diligently. You can use visual deterrents like decoys. Problem with decoys is birds get used to them very quickly, so you need to move them almost on a daily basis. You can use exclusion methods like netting, bird spikes, or wiring. Put up fencing to keep out ground animals. And then it's good to remove trees, brush, and water and food sources off the airfield. Active control methods are directly driving an animal off the airfield. You can use things like pyrotechnics. There's a small pyrotechnic launcher there that's essentially a very specialized bottle rocket. There are things like automated propane cannons that make loud noises. You can use vehicle harassment, which is just chasing an animal. And then the final option is trapping, relocating, or lethally removing a species. Now, that's a very permanent way to do it, and be very careful when you do that, because there are numerous legal protections for different species. Most bird species are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty, and there are rules and regulations that protect certain other species as well. So make sure you can legally remove that species before you try anything. It's wise to routinely document wildlife activity on or near your airport. These records are very helpful for determining certain trends. If you see certain species increasing in frequency at your airfield, or finding hotspots where they like to collect. It helps in more effective wildlife hazard management, and it also helps to qualify for airport improvement program funding for certain projects. A number of our airports have wildlife fences on their capital improvement plans. The way to qualify for that is to prove you have a wildlife issue. So if you thoroughly document when you see creatures on the airport, that serves as good justification for that. It's good to keep a log of specific occasions when significant activity occurs. If you have deer on the airfield, deer are the #1 ranked threat to aircraft due to the amount of destruction they can inflict on an aircraft. Geese trying to nest, blackbirds in local farm fields, gophers are a very common problem digging around airfield lighting. And then anytime you have to chase an animal off of the runway. Anytime you have a strike, please report it with a 5200-7 form. That's an excellent indicator of a wildlife hazard. And then here at left, we have a wildlife fence doing its job, keeping deer out. Another good idea is to take photos. Document any of these strikes as best you can. This is good in case questions arise later on as to if the species was properly identified or the circumstances of a strike. So try to photograph the animal exactly as you found it. Any good identifying features on it, certain types of feathers. This is a red-tailed hawk. And then any damage it may have caused to an aircraft. And if that animal is banded, report it on reportban.gov. Here are a few handy reference documents. There are 2 advisory circulars, one about reporting strikes and one about hazardous wildlife attractants on or near airports. The Airport Cooperative Research Program has a very excellent guidebook. That's report number 32 for addressing aircraft wildlife hazards at general aviation airports. A very good reference for mitigation techniques. And then the FAA and USDA regularly releases their annual report on wildlife strikes to civil aircraft, which has some good details. And that's where many of these statistics came from this report. So with that, that's the end of my portion of the presentation. I will now turn it over to Mike McHugh.
Thanks, Adam. Well, I'd like to talk to you guys a little bit about some educational stuff going on around the state here. I'll try to keep it brief for you. But some of the things we remind you about every year. First of all, the Flight Training Assistance Program. In the last year with COVID, we've seen a huge increase in flight training throughout the country. That said, we haven't seen a huge utilization of the FTAP program within the last year. So just a little bit of a reminder for you. Don't forget, if you have students that are interested in doing flight instruction at your local airport, but you don't have a flight instructor based there, we can reimburse you for up to 75% of those costs at the state rate to get a flight instructor to your airport. Again, that's intended for more rural airports, not necessarily our larger airports that have flight instructors based there. Any questions on that, please do reach out to me. So some of the other programs that we run annually, of course, we have the airport internship program that's available to all of our commercial service airports. And do remember that we increased that to a maximum of a $10,000 reimbursement at an 80% level a year or two ago here. So don't forget about that program, and we encourage all of our commercial service airports to try to find interns to come work for them, whether it's a summer intern or all year long. We do have some really good internship programs throughout the state. We just wrapped up our state international aviation art contest. So the winners of that go on to the national level. Any winners from there go to the international level. Anything you can do at your local airport to help promote that contest in the future. Information typically comes out, excuse me. Sorry, I was getting a phone caller. The International Aviation Art Contest typically gets released in the fall of the year. I send the information out to all of the art teachers in the state, as well as try to promote it on social media and our website and those sorts of things. So anything you can do to help us promote that program, we'd sure appreciate. The passport program, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute here, but if you need books or ink or a new stamp or a mailbox or whatever the case might be, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're always happy to get those supplies out. Typically when people call me about the passport program and ask for a book, I say, hey, I'm happy to send you one, but you could pick one up at your local airport or the first airport that you're planning to do with the passport program. So please try to keep those materials stocked and contact us if you need them. If you plan on doing any educational outreach events, remember we do have grants available. And following similar guidelines to the airport ones, we request a 50% match, but you can request whatever you need. And I can work with you on trying to develop some good programming for that. So don't forget that we have educational grants available. And then finally on our website, we do promote events that are happening around the state. And so if you plan on having a fly-in or something like that, please do reach out to us and we'll put it on our website. You can go to the next slide. So our publications here, do remember that we can get you publications whenever you need. The passport I mentioned just a minute ago. And then our airport directory, as you can see in the left there, is a brand new publication, just came out here within the last couple of weeks. We're working hard to try to get those out to your airports, and there's a few ways that we're doing that. So typically we utilize the conference for that, but of course we're not in person, so I can't hand you a stack of directories. What we've done so far is we've gotten some flight instructors and some FBOs around the state with a bulk supply of airport directories, and we're asking them as their students are going on cross countries or if they have a flight going to one of our North Dakota airports to try to bring some of those directories with them to try to disperse them as quickly as possible to our bigger airports. And so if you don't have them within the next week, please do reach out to us. We're happy to mail them to you. If you have a flight coming to Bismarck, we'd appreciate you picking them up. Or if you happen to be in Bismarck for other business, we appreciate you picking them up just to help save on mailing costs. They tend to cost a little bit to mail, but we're happy to do that if needed. Especially for those of you that are a little bit further away, that might be necessary. So we feel like we've got a pretty good publication. But I also want to remind you on that we republish this every 2 years. And typically we try to update this information in the directory as we're going around doing airport inspections. But if you ever have updates, please get them to the planners. Get them to Adam and Nels. They're keeping a master list going over the next 2 years here. And then we go to republish in a couple of years. They've already got your updates. And so that's really handy. We do try to communicate with you as we're doing those updates, but it's a lot easier if we can get those in advance. And so as you have changes, please get them to us. Also, things might not be going into the directory, but we keep that information in a database. And so if the airport manager changes or phone numbers are changing, things like that, it's good for us to have that information. So please do communicate. And if I can make just one more comment on that, outside of any of our publications, we enjoy talking to you. We enjoy getting out and meeting you. And like Kyle said, we hope to be able to see you in person again at next year's conference, if not sooner. But don't ever hesitate to call us or email or reach out to us in any way. That's what we're here for. We're happy to help. So please do communicate with us as much as you can. Next one. I mentioned a little while ago that we keep an events listing on our website. And so if you're planning spring or summer fly-ins, really any time of the year, fly-ins are the big thing that we put on here. But if you have other events going on that could use a little promotion, please do send them. You could send them to me, or you could send them to our generic NDAero, or send them to one of the planners. We'll get them onto the website. The other thing that does for you is that enables those events to get populated into the quarterly. And so if you've ever looked at the back of the quarterly, there's an event listing on there that's taken from our website. So please get us those events. And I typically say, get them to us as soon as you can. Things like the quarterly, those deadlines come out about a month before the publication gets in your mailbox. And so the sooner you can get us those events, the more we can help promote them. Next slide. like I mentioned before, we're always happy to talk to you and connect. We're trying to connect in as many ways as possible. So don't forget that we are on Facebook. We try to share, events, fly-ins, news, announcements, all sorts of information. If you're not on Facebook, you can get a listing of the things that we post on Facebook right on our website. You just go to our website; it's on the left-hand side, and you can see all those things. So with that, I'll just take one more minute, and I do want to update you on a couple other education things that we've been working with the North Dakota Aviation Association on, and the big items that we're working on there. First of all, we do have a career expo coming up in May. If you can help out with that in any way, and if you're an aircraft operator, maybe you want to bring your aircraft there. Even airport managers, we could use assistance in a number of different ways with that. So that'll be held in Fargo, and we're just starting to promote that event now. So we're looking for sponsors for that event, as well as exhibitors, as well as volunteers to help with logistics for that event. So if you have any interest in that, please do reach out to myself or Darren Hall. And the last thing that I'll just briefly update you on is the again, with the North Dakota Aviation Association, we've been working hard on 2 different FAA education grants that are available. Each one can be awarded for up to $500,000. The deadline is coming up here in a couple of weeks, so we've been working hard to get 2 applications together. One is to promote educational outreach and aircraft mechanic opportunities. And so we've been in touch with the North Dakota State College of Science in Wahpeton, trying to see what we can do for developing further mechanic education opportunities, as well as outreach for K-12 students in all sorts of aviation careers. So that's one grant. The other grant that we've been working on is focused on pilots, engineers, UAS operators. Those are the 3 big things that they talk about. And it's opportunities for high school students and for teachers. And so we're trying to put together some opportunities for high school students, and then professional development opportunities to teachers to help share what opportunities are available in the aviation industry for them to share with their students. So that would be counselors and things like that. So we're hoping to get those grants, and you'll hear more about those in the coming year. The awarding doesn't get done till this summer, and then hopefully you'll hear more on that. So with that, if you want to go to the last slide there, I would say for questions, if you want, we'll be around at the conference, of course, but if you want to email any of us, or always feel free to pick up the phone and call. And I look forward to seeing you out on some airport inspections, if not when you stop by the office, or see you on the other end of the telephone. So thanks a lot, and have a great conference.